Good evening. I'm Francis Levy, co-director of the Philoctetes Center. Dr. Edward Necessian is the other co-director. And welcome to Perception and Imagination, Masters of Theatrical Illusion. The art you see on the walls of the center is, and in the annex, is part of a show called Photographic Visions, The Art of Seeing. And Robert Polidori's photograph is part of that show. And actually, Howard Greenberg Gallery was very instrumental in helping us put this together, and Jeffrey Levy-Hintry, the moderator of the panel, The Psychoneurology of the Photographic Arts, which this exhibit is attendant upon, was very instrumental in putting this and curating this particular exhibit. And remember that all of our programs are available if you go to www.philoctetes.org. In other words, you can go to Philoctetes, the website, you go to past programming, it's all there. You simply go to the site, you scroll down, you look for the roundtable you're interested in, and you hit the button, and you see the roundtable. And this particular roundtable, for instance, will be up in about 4 or 5 days. I'm now pleased to introduce Mark Mitton. Do I pronounce your name right after knowing you all this time? Mark Mitton started doing magic tricks when he was 9 years old and never stopped. He was the apprentice to legendary sleight-of-hand master and vaudevillian Sly Dini, and studied Commedia dell'arte in Italy, physical comedy with David Shiner, and ancient street performing arts in Japan. Mark is fascinated by using magic and crafts as a way to better understand how we all see the world. As a professional sleight-of-hand artist, he has performed for Benoit Mandelbrot, Roald Hoffman, Salman Rushdie, Greg Maddox, Sienna Miller, John Mayer, Sting, and many others. At festivals in Europe and Asia, at the Olympic Games, in war-torn Liberia, and in hospital wards around New York City. He has made Will Smith appear in the middle of Times Square, directed a freak show opening circus for Aerosmith, and taught sleight of hand to Stanley Tucci and John Travolta for varying film projects. Last summer, he created magic for the public theater production of A Midsummer Night's Dream in Central Park. Mark Mitton will moderate tonight's panel and introduce our other distinguished guests. Take it away, Mark.
Thank you, Francis. Well, thank you all for coming tonight. And how this all happened was I met Francis and Ed after a cosmology panel. And I have a friend who's an astrophysicist. And he was, we would always talk about how we see the world. And I would always tell him about some of the lessons that I had learned as an apprentice to this old magician. And we had these wonderful discussions. But I realized that it was rare for a lot of craftspeople to get together to just talk about how our craft has changed the way that we see the world. And the Philoctetes Center was nice enough to give us an opportunity to invite master craftsmen in to discuss this subject. So I'd just like to open with a quote from E.M. Forster from his book Aspects of the Novel. He says, "Indeed, the more the arts develop, the more they depend on each other for definition. We will borrow from painting first and call it pattern. Later we will borrow from music and call it rhythm." And without further ado, I'd like to introduce our distinguished panelists. And we have Charles Reynolds, Jules Fisher, Greg Meeh, and Peter Maloney. And thank you so much for coming. And if you could just tell everyone what you do and just give an example of something that gets you excited about your craft. Would you like to start, Charles?
Sure.
Okay.
I'm a semi-retired magic consultant, which is a bit of a redundancy. But I've worked on a lot of television shows and quite a few Broadway shows, with the strange job of supplying magic effects for the show. Quite different than special effects, which is the Meeh specialty over here. But when there's a show that has a specific magic theme to it, or indeed when it's a magic show, I was the magic director of the Blackstone show when it played at the Majestic quite a few years ago. I worked for Doug Henning for about 15 years, did all of his television specials and all of his tours, and a couple of his Broadway shows, including Merlin. That's about it. In the last few years, I've done 30-some television specials devoted to various aspects of magic in London.
Well, thank you very much, Jules. And Jules?
First of all, I'm here to learn how to pronounce Philoctetes.
Aren't we all?
I design lighting in the theater. My life is working in the theater, and I design lighting for any kind of entertainment event. Broadway shows, off-Broadway, spectacles, puppet shows, anything that needs lighting that's entertainment-based. And I have worked many cities around the world, particularly in New York. I make my living here, but I've recently done, and asking what's exciting, I did a production of a spectacle in Las Vegas directed by Franco Dragone called Le Rêve at a hotel, the Wynn Hotel. And it's a 90-minute spectacle, but it has no words in it. So it's all lighting changes for 90 minutes to provide spectacle, energy, dynamism, color, and just make the evening something that you won't forget visually. I've done plays and musicals on Broadway. I've done a lot of musicals, and musicals are fascinating to me as a lighting designer because they involve rhythm and they involve changes that are based in the music and the emotion of the music as well as the percussive side of it. As we get deeper into it, I realize that it's all an illusion. Everything that I work on is an illusion. There's no reality. So that's why I'm here.
Thank you very much. And Greg Meeh?
I do special effects mostly in live theater. My specialty is the live effect as opposed to the post-production kind of effect that is often seen in movies. My job is very different in different types of production. Sometimes, for example, it will be a sense of movement, a sense of change of place, a sense of energy through atmospheric. At other times, it is enhancing emotion. How a story moves in spectacle is very different than how it moves in a story-based theatrical piece where your assignment becomes much more specific, blowing up a stove when the guy shoots it with a shotgun, for example, as opposed to a very lyrical moment, which is can be just a wave of atmospheric fog moving across the stage and creating a breaker, almost like a rolling wave in the ocean. So.
Yeah.
It's different. It's the thing I like best about it is discovering the new thing, inventing the new idea, and working with very talented, inspirational people who are trying to bring something to a viewer and inspire some feeling, something that is bigger than any of us.
Yeah. Thank you very much. And finally, we have Peter Maloney. And
well, I'm an actor, and my job is to create the illusion that I am someone else on stage. I've been doing this for 45 years now professionally, and sometimes I portray myself. I've written a number of pieces which I call autobiographical fictions. I use the word fictions because we all know the trouble that memoir has gotten into lately. False memory or false depiction of past life experiences. So I just try to head off the trouble by calling them autobiographical fictions. But in most of the work that I do, I play a character who is not myself, often very different from myself. And I've always been interested in that creation, that illusion that the actor creates, not only of a character who is not himself, but the illusion 8 times a week that what he or she is doing is being done for the first time ever. It's a different kind of illusion than the other gentlemen on the panel work on, but we all work together very often to try to achieve the same effect. At the moment, after less than a week rehearsal, I will open tomorrow night at 45 Bleecker in Ethan Cohen's play Almost an Evening. I will play God. I've had less than a week rehearsal. I'm replacing a wonderful actor named F. Murray Abraham. And the illusion that I will create tomorrow night, hopefully, is that of a person who knows what he's doing. and is perfectly calm about it. Which, believe me, I am not.
Well, speaking of creating the illusion of knowing what you're doing, let's jump right into the whole idea of how you create a lighting effect or a special effect or a magic trick and give the audience a sense of believability and reality. Do you have any principles or ideas that you use, or do you handle it? Let's take lighting first, for example.
Since I work in a small niche area of the theater involving light, I am always looking for the properties of light that can make something believable. I get inspiration from nature. I look at the real thing, the way the real light in this room comes down into the space, or how the sun rises or sets. And I'm trying to find the properties of light by looking at it that can evoke a feeling or express an emotion. I want to find the essence of the visual stimulus. I look at that picture. I don't want to first of all, I don't want to reproduce the real. The theater is all an illusion. There's nothing real in it. We don't put anything on stage that's real. It's natural. If we had to give it an ism, it's not realism that we put on stage. It's naturalism. It's the essence of something. So I'm looking for what is it in that scenario that I see. The scenario is a hospital and a baby is being born, or a blacksmith working at a forge and sparks are flying, or someone just staring at a sunset at the ocean. I'm looking to find what are the properties of light that I can put on the stage that will communicate that to you. And I'm overemphasizing this, but for a reason, it's not real. So I am not looking to find the properties of the reality, but when you watch it as an audience member, you will be moved because it does something in your brain that allows you to say, that's a sunset. But I don't put a real sunset up there. We could do that. We could take a camera, photograph a sunset, and project it in the theater. But it doesn't have any of the emotion or any of the qualities that an artist brings to the play. A play is done by a group of people, but starting with the playwright, then the director, and most importantly, the actors. We have to make those people, when they're behaving on stage, the behavior of the actor, seem believable. And believable is what allows us to have perception. Through our senses, we believe something. We understand through the senses. And one of the senses is light, probably the principal one. You can have a play without words. You can have a play without sound. But you can't have it without light, or it's very hard to. So I'm always looking to find that essence of it visually that I can put on stage in picking light. And just to give you some quick examples of that, I'm looking to find out how bright the light is, what angle the light is coming from. If it's a sunset, I know it should be low to the horizon. And if I don't do that, if the light that I'm using to portray that sunset, or a person standing in that sunset, is coming from a high angle, it's not believable. And it's all unconscious. You would look at it and you'd see there's an actor and he's saying the lines, but something in the back of your mind is saying, that's not, I don't believe that, because the angle's wrong, or the color is wrong, or the quality itself of the light. Is it soft? Is it hard-edged? So I'm looking for those elements that will communicate the story.
It's fascinating. And Greg, do you have an example? I'm thinking of, you've done some spectacular shows, like I'm thinking of Ka in Las Vegas. Do you have any example of how you took an effect and made it more believable?
I'm always trying to discover the vocabulary that the group is developing to tell the story, to make it believable, to share the emotion. You know, the big effect at the end of Ka is a celebratory display, the fireworks display, the discovery of fire, and then the uses fire can be put to war, to cooking the fish, to the beauty of just creating something with fire. How we work that and shape that into the story is a collaborative effort, and it's not only, it becomes collaborative with the viewer as well as with your designers, your performers, your director, your author. I don't know, does that answer the question?
It does. Yeah, and this afternoon, actually, we were talking on the phone, and you talked about how you see, in going from one production to another, the development of these different vocabularies.
They can be totally different, highly stylized to. I mean, Jules, you were talking about naturalism, but I would think that naturalism can have many different forms. It's you're trying to convey emotion and story, and it can be so stylized, and still everyone can know exactly what the story is, exactly what the emotion is, even though it has nothing to do with reality.
Can you give an example of a specific effect?
Well, this wave that I was speaking of earlier, totally out of context with the moment of the show, in terms of realism, in terms of the space where you are, but totally in the spirit of the emotion, carrying the emotion, and being a tool to move us to a climax of that emotion and moving on into the next scene.
Yeah. And sorry.
Well, I can give it. Given your question about the effect being tailored for the situation, I once directed a play, one of the greatest plays ever written, The Plow and the Stars by Sean O'Casey. It's a difficult play. It's 4 acts. The third act is especially difficult because it's an exterior in the middle of 3 interiors. So the demands of lighting and a kind of creation of a sense of reality in the exterior is very different from what in all the other acts. And I had a wonderful actress playing Bessie Burgess. She was an older woman, perhaps older than the character as described by O'Casey, but she was such a great actress, and she looked so great that I cast her, and I was very happy to have done so. In the 4th act, she is killed by a bullet coming through a window during the rebellion in the streets of Dublin. She goes to the window to look out, and she is hit by a sniper's bullet. And I loaded this poor lady down with blood packs. I mean, I had her get hit. I wanted a real bloody effect, so I wanted her to be hit 3 times by bullets. And I loaded this poor woman down with blood packs. And in dress rehearsal and technical rehearsals, she was having a terrible time coping with this, because she had to pull the thing that started the blood pouring, that soaked through her dress as she turned around, and we see this vision of carnage. And she was incapable of dealing with the technical demands which I was imposing on her. So we had to rethink it. Now, I think all directing is is largely problem solving. Day by day, you have different problems, you have to solve them. So we solved this one by eliminating the blood packs, and on the windowsill putting a pan of blood on the other side, the backstage side, so that when she went to the window, she put her hand in the blood, we heard the sound of the shot, she goes like this to her breast. Oh, hello. Well, that would have been good. I could have. That never occurred to me. She put her hand in the pan of blood, clapped it to her breast, turned around, and when she took her hand away, there was the wound, there was the blood, and it was much better than what I had originally envisioned. You know, it was much, much better an effect than the original thought of the packs of blood that had to be, you know, wires pulled, or however we arranged it, I don't remember. So it all has to be tailored to the situation, and very often to the actor, the performer. You know, you can try imposing, but often you are, you know, unable to insist.
Simplicity
Yeah.
is, you know, the simplest way we can create the emotion with the least amount of technical stuff is what we're always looking for.
And I think the more what you see happens in the audience's mind rather than as a literal thing on stage, the more effective it is. That's true of a lot of magic. It's based on things that the spectators bring themselves to the theater, and the magicians don't have to prove it that it's real. For example, you might be doing an effect that uses a glass, and the audience, you put a silk handkerchief in the glass and the silk handkerchief disappears, let's say. The more the audience assumes that is a real glass, the more effective the trick will be. And the audience brings all that assumption with him. If the magician had picked up the glass, that let us say is a bottomless glass, and said, "Here I have an ordinary glass," immediately the people in the audience will assume that it is not an ordinary glass. If you just pick up a glass and put the silk handkerchief in it and put it down, the assumptions they bring to it is what makes it effective when the silk handkerchief finally disappears. And this is true across the board. This is true with big stage illusions and small card tricks and coin tricks and so on and so on. They've got to create it, and the job of the magician is to suggest it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I should point out that the panel has a bit of a secret in that four of us, I think, are magicians.
Yes.
Greg, have you done a little bit?
Not since I was very young and passed out of heat prostration in the attic practice.
But there's still a connection. That's very interesting. And it makes sense because of what we all do. But Jules is a terrific magician and an amazing... How has magic affected your lighting? Or is there a connection?
What I said earlier, that to me, all the theater is an illusion. So I'm always creating, if magic is to get people to believe something, and then they find out that's not what they believed to begin with. They thought the animal was here, and now it's over here. The perception has been changed. I'm doing that all the time in the theater, making you believe something out of things that's not really there. There's no real. We don't bring the sun into the theater to make a sunset, or the moon, but I think that each effect that I do, each cue, is a magic trick. Is in some way getting you to believe something with information that's not true. I remember, everyone knows a quote that Picasso said, "All art is a lie to serve a greater truth." And in the theater, it is. We are lying to you all the time. And the very fact that it takes place in a theater is an illusion. It's happening in a place that you shouldn't expect reality. The same speech given in town hall has a different believability than at the Schubert Theater. You're walking into a space that says, what I'm going to see is an illusion. And so I like to think that I'm doing magic tricks all night, that each light cue as it changes is some little magic trick. And similar to how the methods might be concealed in magic, I don't want you to see the light. I think this is an interesting point, because I think it's probably true in what you do. We don't want you to see it as a effect, or as a special effect, or as a light cue. We just want you to believe what you're looking at. So it is magical to do that. That is magical in the theater.
That reminds me, I overheard you tell a story about something that you did in Ricky Jay and his 52 Assistants about a very subtle lighting change. Do you know what I'm referring to? I don't know if I could give you...
What was the... give me a hint.
It was at the moment of a revelation that the audience was focused.
Oh yes. That's a major element of cueing light or manipulating light in the theater, which was to focus attention. And an actor has hundreds of means of doing that, in gesture and the modulating of the voice. Well, in lighting, we have a very simple way to focus attention. If you're looking at something, if I make it brighter, you will see it. Or if you're looking at something and I take the light away elsewhere, the negative space is as important in lighting as the positive space. And I gave an example with Ricky Jay, where he did a show at the second stage uptown on Broadway and 76th Street or something. And it was just Ricky, a magician, alone with a table, doing card tricks for most of the evening. And the lighting started out it took place in what looked like a library, a room with bookshelves. It was natural. That could have been his personal library. And a table covered in green cloth that he performed these effects on. And in the beginning of the evening, the whole room was lit. And the table was lit, and Ricky was lit, meaning light was on all these objects. And as this one magic trick became more intense, as he wanted you to be more focused on what was happening, to look at a certain spot or see a card, be it surprise you and be something you didn't know, I took the light down in the rest of the room. So it's not just making him brighter that worked, it was taking the light away elsewhere. So the room got darker, and the same light stayed on him at that time, and he did a lot of the tricks seated at this table with two other guests, two people from the audience, one on his left, one on his right, as witnesses. So what they saw, you as the audience could believe you were seeing too. And there was light on them. And as the trick progressed, there was less light on them, and then less and less. So I was just pulling down the light everywhere else. What the resultant was, he looked brighter. His hands looked brighter. And the focus got more dynamic. You're looking there because of removing other light. So it's a technique. It's one of the lighting techniques to focus attention.
And when you do that, you don't have to, as the performer, you don't have to be the person to focus the attention. I mean, it happens in the audience's head. I mean, I think magicians should never lie. I mean, to bring a box out and say, this is an empty box, this is big trouble to begin with. Because first of all, it might not be an empty box, or you might later have an occasion that it would have to be an empty box. But if the audience assumes something, it has infinitely more effect. I think that there's all too much of this thing of showing things that the audience first of all doesn't believe in because of the way you're handling it, and secondly, the things are gaffed, and you can't blame them for suspecting that because you're a magician.
But if you, in the same way, if you can get the audience to come to that conclusion on their own, they feel they own the idea, and therefore they'll believe it more than if you are trying to convince them of it.
I think this is applicable in theater of any type. That your viewer is a willing participant, and if rather than give it to them on a plate of all of the parts defined as realism would be, that the hints are much more powerful, and the viewer wants to participate and can create a more believable story in their head than you can ever give them.
And this applies a lot to your profession of acting, because an audience is much more likely to react to a magician as being really good if the magician himself believes in what he's doing. I worked for about 15 years for a magician named Doug Henning, and we did a number of tours and a lot of television specials and a few Broadway shows. And I think one of the reasons that Doug was a success as a magician is that he believed in magic. I mean, he really did. In his heart of hearts, what he was doing was utterly believable to himself. And consequently, it was believable to the audience. And it also was why he didn't become a threat to the audience. Because, you know, magic can be very annoying to audiences. You fool people, you made a fool of them. And people don't particularly enjoy being made fools of. The idea of going around and deceiving people has had a bad press since the Garden of Eden, I guess.
But in the case of Doug, I'm just questioning, at the same time, he also knew that it was a trick in many instances. I'm not saying there weren't things, but he knew when he was pulling a lever that no one saw, he was doing something mechanical, let's say.
Yeah.
So we had to know that part wasn't really.
Oh, absolutely. There are two things going on at all times. One is the mechanics, which the magician has to be on top of, but also the acting side of it, which has to convey to the audience that what the magician is doing is real. Well, you know, Jules is a very good close-up coin magician and good close-up magician, and one of the things, the keys to it is naturalness. If you do things naturally, and if you do them also in a way that the audience doesn't suspect you, the effect is going to be much more powerful. Of course, Doug at the end of his career gave up magic and became part of the Maharishis TM movement. And I think at that point his belief in magic crossed the line just a bit. But I think it was also there in the beginning. It was in his personality.
Well, Peter, how would you compare, because you've been on stage as an actor and you've been on stage as a magician, so how would you compare working with the believability in both instances of the audience?
Well, for me, I think it's mostly being an actor. I mean, magic, I love magic, but it is, as I used to say in my act, it's only one of many loves in my life. And unlike so many of the magicians I know, I'm not a top sleight of hand man. I've devoted my life to perfecting those skills and sleights, So with me, it truly was fooling them by pretending to be a magician, and I guess if I did succeed in fooling them, then it was some reflection of my ability to act. But what Charles, what Jules called up here about the duality of believing in the magic, as Charles said Doug did, and at the same time knowing what he was doing technically, because he had to know when he was pulling the lever or whatever he was doing, the secret stuff. This is true of actors too. People don't know too much about acting, and perhaps that's the best. We don't want to know how the guy walks across the tight wire. But actors do not become the characters that they're playing on the stage. Some people think they do. Some people perpetuate the myth over years that the actor becomes the character and lives the character. And it's just not true. There's a duality there. Yes, through technique, if you have to do it 8 times a week, sometimes for more than a year, then it's your technique, your craft, which enables you to pretend to be that other person successfully each time. Each time it's new, each time it's different, because the audience is different. And because you feel different every day when you come on the stage. So you have certain things that are the same. Your work, your homework, your biography, everything you bring to it. If you're a Stanislavskian, then your work on emotional memory. But it's a question of craft. It's never losing yourself in the fantasy which you're presenting. Never. You couldn't do it.
If you, during the period that you're doing your character on the stage, don't believe in the character, the audience is not going to believe in you. If as a magician, you don't believe in what you're doing in terms of the magic, the audience will get it like that.
Right.
Yeah.
I agree.
I think in Bergman's persona, wasn't it true that the actress withdraws into psychosis and playing a bigger name and fully fell into the character?
Yeah.
She had a lot that was bothering her. A lot. If I remember the war, Buddhists burning themselves in protest, bad family situation, she was in a lot of trouble. Yes. Yeah.
And Ang Lee did that again in Lust Caution, where the actor, it's very unclear what that, the woman is playing the part of an actress, the actress in the movie, and she becomes so absorbed in her role as the lover of the Japanese collaborator that it's unclear whether she is really playing the role anymore or she's become the lover.
Well, then it becomes psychosis. Then it becomes a medical problem, a psychological problem, and it has nothing to do with art whatsoever. So, it's makes for interesting movies.
I think the people in magic, by the way, to whom that happens most often are mentalists or mind readers. Nobody can read anybody's mind. You can read somebody's thoughts, but those thoughts have to exist. They have to be written down on a piece of paper or in some other way manifest so that the person playing the mentalist believes it. But there are an awful lot of people in mentalism who it begins to make them very nervous because they begin having hits on things. It starts out as a trick. But there comes a point when I think there's a real confusion in their minds as to whether they're really doing it or not.
And we should explain that a hit is when you guess something accurately. I guess we all know now from the nomenclature of magicians being everywhere in popular movies.
That takes place in the movie Leap of Faith.
Yes.
Where Steve Martin is fooling you, but maybe he's not. Maybe he really believes it at one point. Same with Elmer Gantry.
Yes. Yeah.
We need to take a question early because Paul Binder has to leave, and he's over here. This is Paul Binder, the founder of the Big Apple Circus.
Can you go to the mic?
Can you go to the mic? We're going to have more questions for the rest of the audience, but
Start by saying that I work in a branch of theater and take exception with my esteemed colleague, Mr. Fisher, that all art is a lie. We work in the branch of theater that everything we do is reality. We do not create characters. The guy is actually walking on the wire.
Right.
Indeed, the metaphor is created by the audience.
Yeah.
And we use light in a different way than creating illusion. We are saying, to you, look what's really happening here. This person is really doing that. And I would say, I also propose, and I don't want to disagree with you.
No, but I'd like to disagree. I'd like to.
But and we and our audiences respond with enormous emotion. I hear Greg talking about. He's creating the emotional, the essence of the emotion when he's working on the illusion. Okay, our audiences respond with enormous excitement. They cheer and they scream, and sometimes they have tears in their eyes. It's a very powerful medium that we work in. But when it's done by artists,
right?
When the performers are artists, and the people who create the music are artists, and where we're working in that kind of collaboration, and the people who like it. But we start with reality.
Yeah, I guess the separation I would have thought was that I'm involved in theater that has drama. It's not, and it may happen to be entertainment, but it's not only entertainment. And I think what you're involved with is pure entertainment.
Well, I wouldn't say that. I would say that we're the closest form of modern theater that harkens back to the roots of the original rituals out of which all performing arts grew. So that the emotional content of what we create by creating the reality lets the audience have their response much in this way that the primal rituals of pre-theatrical, pre-art.
What is
when tribes met in circles like this and acted out the hopes and fears and aspirations of their culture, of their society, and the issues of the major issues, the big ones, birth and death and harvest and hunt and all that kind of stuff. They met in a circle and they acted out those hopes, fears, and aspirations.
But now aren't they becoming actors in a drama as opposed to performers who are presenting skill and prowess and amazing technical ability? But are they expressing a communication based on drama?
Yes, the answer is you started by saying
all art.
You started by saying no. You started saying all theater starts with playwrights, and I say theater preceded playwrights. There was a theater before there were ever playwrights, or playbills, or directors, or all the things that we're artists. We create theater. But what I'm saying is that the pre-artistic forms were where people acted out their hopes and fears and aspirations for the benefit of the community, survival of the community. And that I think that our branch of the theater, the creative circus, comes the closest to that in the modern culture. So, but in any case,
I would love to have
am in the same business as you are,
Yeah.
Mr. Fisher,
Okay.
and we're colleagues for a long time, and with Mark and Greg and others, but we approach it with a completely different perspective.
Well,
Well, that's right.
Absolutely.
That's
What
right.
is
This
that?
is not an actor pretending to walk on a tightrope.
although
It's character. He is a guy walking on a tightrope.
That's right.
Although it's funny, I'm thinking of my wife Susanna. We were at a circus last spring, and that was directed by a friend. And the first time that she saw one of the high wire walkers fall, she screamed. And then the second time, and it's funny, she lives with the magician, right? So the second time she saw, we went back the next night, and right on cue, the high wire act, he fell. And caught the rope just in time and pulled himself up dramatically. And then she was all resentful. And I was like, honey, it's a show.
But
the other thing I was saying, Jules, when I did work in the theater, when we created the circus effects for Barnum on Broadway, we took actors and we pretended they were circus performers. And they pretended they were circus performers.
Yeah.
So we had a woman walking across the high wire to the back of the stage, and indeed she fell. And we created a safety device for her so she could fall, and then she floated down to the ground. But there is a very big distinction in how we approach the audience.
Well, I think illusion mix. First of all, mixes very, very poorly with circus. It's a different thing. Theater and drama are both very, very close in that they're both entertainments that are forms of illusion. But a circus isn't a form of illusion. A circus is involved with reality. When the Melendez do their 7-person high pyramid, that's real. And I think somebody in a circus who would fake, that could be faked. It could be faked with invisible wires, and you wouldn't see the wires, particularly if Jules lit them. but I don't think. I honestly don't think magic and circus have ever mixed terribly comfortably.
In the next couple of years, we have some magicians coming that we
Scott.
work. It's right.
Yeah.
Well, now there are a lot of people who are thinking of them. Who think of them.
Charlie every year. He comes to the circus every year.
I never miss your show.
But this is
Really, I'm one.
And this is a great transition because
Biggest fans.
we all work in these different, being kind of tricksters of a kind and being able to heighten reality. We all do work in a wide variety of mediums. In the theater, you've done amazing films. You lit Chicago, the movie, and you've worked on these grand spectacles. The lighting of the what was the lighting of the World Trade Center called?
My partner Paul Morantz technically designed the Twin Towers, the light that happens on the memorial every 9/11. It's a series of spotlights that come out of the ground. It's very cleverly done. It's an illusion too. I'll tell you just a little bit about it. The beam of light that comes up on 9/11. Now I think it's the 6th year we did it, and it is a series of individual spotlights that are shooting straight up vertically to make what looks like 2 columns of light. And there's a trick involved in making it look like 2 columns because it's made out of 80 beams of light, 40 for each one of those beams. And my office developed how to do that, and we're proud of it. And we do it every year for one night. It's about $500,000 spent to do that.
How do you do it?
Well, I just tell you one. But
I apologize, but
I would like to have this conversation in greater depth because I would like to ask: are you creating an illusion?
Well, we are artists working in a craft, but we are starting with the reality, and then and the audience takes their own metaphor. Oh, we lead them very often, and we work with lighting designers, and we work with scenic designers, and we work with other artists. But I don't know that we're creating an illusion so much as heightening the reality. I think that's and that's very different from creating the illusion. It's like the character in Man of La Mancha. I will create a man. He starts by saying, "I will create a man." we don't start there. We sort of say, we are a man, and this is what we're going to do. We're ordinary guys, and look, and this is what we're going to do. And then all of a sudden we heighten that reality, and that's where the emotion comes from. You know, Greg talks about the emotional moment of what happens in the theatrical environment. That's where we converge.
I would agree.
And Doug's, Doug Henning's idea that he believed in magic, and isn't it interesting that he went off into a spiritual quest that, you know, when it was all over. So I think it all converges, and that we approach the emotional reality from different perspectives. That's me.
We're seeing the convergence of the circus arts with the thematic journey in the spectacle, the Cirque du Soleil type spectacle that we're seeing, and it's a real convergence of the reality, maybe a tempered reality, to serve the thematic story, the thematic line, the thematic journey that's proposed for the audience.
I apologize.
Well, thank you, Paul.
Jump in like this.
Thank you.
All right.
Nice to see you.
Thank you.
Okay, good luck on the road.
Nice to see you.
Good to see you.
Paul Binder from the Big Apple Circus. Okay.
I think mentioning the Cirque du Soleil is interesting because I've seen a lot of them and I really enjoy them. But carrying out a narrative or building an illusion fits perfectly in your idea of letting the audience figure out what it is. Because if you try to say what that Cirque du Soleil story was really about, it just falls apart.
Yeah.
But if the audience can leave thinking, I know it's about a dream, I had this dream, I think the audience has to supply it, particularly for Cirque du Soleil.
You know, one of the big things in magic is transcending the puzzle. I mean, it's like a continuum. At one end, you've got a fairy tale, and at the other end, you've got a detective story. And there are a lot of people who are there just for the detective story because they want to figure out how the trick works. There's also another proportion of the audience who can watch magic and throw themselves into the experience and not make it a puzzle all the time, you know. And that's much more difficult to do, and it takes a lot more skill on the part of the magician, on the part of the performers, than trick boxes, you know.
I think it would be interesting to find out when, if you study theater history, and especially the history of design, you can see David Belasco and his productions where everything was absolutely real, and there was real gas in the stove, and the water really boiled, and you smelled the food cooking. I mean, talk about a man who didn't trust an audience. For a minute. But this business of letting the audience be the partner with the artist, I was extremely fortunate when I first came to New York as a young man. My first show in New York was with Jules, and we did a play called Telemachus Clay, which had 12 actors on a stage. The back wall was black velvet, the floor was black velvet, the walls were black velvet, there were 12 black stools, the actors were all dressed in black, and they never looked at each other. They looked straight forward. The writer's theory was that the actor would speak his lines, the intention in the line would go through the audience, come around, and go to the actor sitting over here. It was quite a hit for off-Broadway. And the entire, this is what makes the theater different from a movie. A movie, you would go to Hollywood, you would start in a small town, you would go to the hospital where the woman was having the baby. We went to all those places. But we went there because Jules did the lighting. There were hundreds of lighting cues, and I, up in the booth, operated the sound tape, which accompanied the different scenes. But we took the audience on this trip, and for that 2-hour time in the theater at the writer's stage, they, I think, believed that they were where we told them they were. Without sets, without projections, with nothing but Jules's lights and the appropriate sound, and the actors talking directly to the audience. So the theater, come on, the theater is a great thing because it does involve the audience as a partner when it's working on its highest level of, I think. You know, we don't just sit there watching the water boil on the stove and say, oh, that's really boiling, you know. I mean, our imaginations get to be exercised.
Thank you for saying that, Peter, very much. Two thoughts quickly. Not quickly, but in the Belasco case, I think it was because the play wasn't there. He felt necessary to provide some other entertainment, like can you smell the bacon, as opposed to figuring out what the story is.
Absolutely, right.
And in Telemachus Clay, I think like a lot of good pieces of theater, again, you come back to getting the audience to feel it. It's storytelling. When you tell a story around a campfire, how do you... Steven Spielberg is a great storyteller.
No question.
How do you get people to believe? How do you get them to listen? And it's building these illusions, one illusion on top of each other. I'm providing one that makes you think the sunset may be real. You're providing one that makes the tale itself seem real. We add costumes, and we add special effects. We add all the other illusions so that the audience will believe it. Right. I think that's the essence of perception, to be aware of, through the senses, to understand something.
And they believe it. They do believe it for the period of the play. I mean, it's not this. Right. Everybody's into this willing suspension of disbelief thing, you know, and they're writing about magic, but magic doesn't involve really a willing suspension of disbelief until it's over. I mean, when they go out of the theater, they say, you know, he didn't really saw that woman in half, you know, or that woman who was floating in the air, she wasn't really floating in the air. But if the audience, while they're seeing it, and then that's why magic is so much less effective on television than it is in the theater. You've got to be there in the room. It's got to be live. You've got to be live. And then if you can get the audience into that state of mind, they've experienced real magic. They may go home and say, well, later, you know, I know the girl floated in the air because there were a lot of wires attached to her or something. But it can't happen at the moment they're watching it. And that's the skill of the performer, is to keep that from happening, because it's got to transcend the puzzle. It can't just, you know, be, you know.
If I may add, this may or may not be on the same topic, but one of the essences of theater is paradox, is conflict. To get the audience to believe two separate things, you're making the audience work. If you believe in that King Lear was noble, you also can believe the tragicness of his life. But if you can get the audience to first believe one illusion and then present the second, the audience has to now work. The brain has to fight itself to come to its own conclusion. The audience is now saying, is this the case, or is that the case, or how does it relate to me? Do I have that? And it's the dual nature in the theater that we're, again, both of them. Either one, we're using illusions to make you believe it.
Completely agree.
And without that, it's not a satisfying experience.
Luckily, Paul's not here, so I can say he's wrong.
And exactly why is he wrong? Well, it is interesting that he was defining one kind of circus, and of course now, as you brought up, Greg, that there's such a wide variety of circus arts now, all over the spectacle. And your show, Le Rêve, it's certainly theatrical production.
Yeah, this show, Le Rêve, in Las Vegas, has lighting effects that, again, I think I'm really interested in talking more to Paul, by the way, because my mind's saying, wait a minute, he is not building illusions. And I think that's the essence, one of the essences of theater, to make you believe something that's not really true. As you say, you're not that character.
Yeah. The only two things in theater, if you really think about it, that involve the only two aspects of theater that involve illusions. One is drama, where it is an illusion that this is not really the King of Denmark, and magic. Everything else is a different thing. I mean, the parades are shows, but they're shows of celebration. A circus is a show, but the circus has to be real. If you go to a circus and they're faking everything, and you see that more and more in the world of the circus now. If somebody's going to do a 7-person high from a springboard.
Oh, safety wires, you mean?
Yeah, all that. I think it's better if they did a 6-person high and risk their lives a little. I mean, I don't want this to sound like the Roman arena, but I do think that edge of danger and reality is very, very important in the circus, and it's not at all the same as what you get from drama and what you get from magic.
I'd like to disagree with you about the safety wire, and I think there's something a difference between danger of life and limb and danger of failure, and that it's very exciting to see these acts attempt fabulous feats, and to be able to know they're not going to kill themselves, and to
or at least hope they aren't.
Well, no, they miss and they tumble and they're caught. Yeah. I mean, if we go back to the trapeze without the net, it was at the Brooklyn Academy of Music that the first triple somersault guys, they were out of Massachusetts, a fabulous acrobatic team.
The Brothers?
The Brothers, yeah.
The fellow from Ohio published that book.
Yeah.
Whale ends in O-N. No. Ends in O-N.
The Hanlons?
Hanley Brothers.
Yes, Hanlon Brothers. It was the Hanlon Brothers.
Yeah.
Right.
That was at the Academy of Music in Brooklyn.
Academy of Music from the stage all the way out into the house, and missed the somersault, and the guy went, ruined the act, ruined the lives of the people.
Well, this is a question.
It still happens.
I think it is an interesting question.
It's still there. It's still an element there.
And they invented the net after that
after
accident.
that.
Yeah.
That's
but the question, maybe it's an intellectual question, but should circuses have danger? You're saying you can enjoy the same feat of someone doing something if they had a support wire as well. In other words, the wire was not aiding their effect. The support wire is not making them able to perform the Relenda's multiple tower.
I think it's better with the element of danger.
I would like
a traditionalist.
Well, if you put,
I really do feel that.
If you put exactly, suppose it's an animal act and the trainer is putting his head inside of a lion's mouth. Do you want to know that there's not the risk of danger? That the lion can't eat, has no teeth.
I like the Big Apple Circus.
And very bad breath. Lions have bad
Always
breath.
a risk.
Well, Cirque has no animals. That's
right.
Oh yes, isn't that sad?
Well, I think in my younger days, I was part of a theater group, the Open Theater, which was the child of Julian Beck and Judith Molina's Living Theater, and our inspiration came in large part from Grotowski, who had started his studies of a particular kind of acting in Poland in the early 60s. And I have to put a vote in favor of danger. We were young, we were strong. Our desire was to be actors, heroic actors, almost like what do they call them? The Marvel. What do they call them? Superheroes. And we worked, and we rehearsed, and I think there was a danger involved, and I think the audience was very aware of the danger. It would have been really dangerous if anybody but us tried to do it.
Well,
you know what I'm saying? We were skilled.
Yeah.
We were skilled, but the audience sensed that there was some kind of tightrope being walked. And there were times when people got hurt. There were times when people got hurt, and I think it's bloody exciting if the play supports such a situation.
Well, there's even
Now compare that to magic and cutting a lady in half with a buzzsaw. You know, the whole audience. It's an entirely different thing. I mean, it has to do with the audience being able to project itself into what is essentially a theatrical scene, just as they do in a play. But in a circus, when people edge or take the edge off everything they do that's dangerous, suddenly you don't have a circus anymore.
Yeah. There's another view of danger, and danger is not the right word, but one of the powers of theater is that it's mortal. It's not true on television, it's not true in motion pictures, but when you watch a play, that actor might not live out the rest of the act. There is a chance that I'm not wishing that, but that sense of mortality exists every time you watch a live actor do something.
Oh, yeah.
So it's the opposite extreme of danger of high wire act. But that's one of the powers of theater, is that you believe, you know it's someone, a human who is alive is doing it for you.
That's right.
It's a little bit related to something I realized about myself, and maybe other people feel the same way, when I watch you do your magic tricks. I worry and become anxious that you're going to fail. And I have a feeling you work on that a little bit. So I think part of what happens in theater is that, at least for me, I don't want things to go wrong. I want things to work out. I want the sunset to make me think like it's a sunset, even though I know that it's not a sunset. I don't want to see the lights. It's not that I'm looking to see where you are putting your... I don't want to see it. Mm-hmm. So I think, at least for me, I am always trying to collaborate with whoever is doing the illusion rather than fighting.
Well, we need more like you.
We like you.
No, I think a lot of... Look, if there wasn't a tendency to want to believe in magic and to want to believe in illusion, you wouldn't have religion, you wouldn't have all the interest in magic. We want to.
Yes. That's your willingness to suspend your disbelief. You're bringing that willingness to the theater.
I think it's more the anxiety of it not working out rather than a willing suspension of disbelief. I think it's the other way around. When I watch Mark, I don't want him to fail. I would feel terrible. He's having dinner with me and he's showing me a card trick. If he fails, I feel terrible.
I want him to fail once in a while. He's much too clever. You got to knock him down a peg.
But are you worried because it would be embarrassing?
No, I think we have anxiety about our beliefs not being correct, not being true. I think that's an anxiety that humans have. At least I have.
Yeah. You want to believe in success.
You want that things work out.
Yeah.
We're just about to go to questions, sir, but not quite. No, on this area of willing suspension of disbelief, yeah, I do think that that's kind of the role of the magician, is to, in some way, allow his audience to believe that it might fail. I mean, a great example is when I was first learning to escape from a straitjacket, I learned from this old pro. And he said, first thing you got to do, kid, convince him you can't get out. and I've never forgotten that. It's actually really, it's so simple, it's often forgotten, that kind of the first responsibility of the person that's doing something amazing is to remind the audience that they're doing something amazing. That's where actually I disagree with Paul as well, that I could say openly now that he's gone. But what I can say is that
there's somebody here taking notes.
Exactly. I'll tell him myself tomorrow. But I think what he might be. He might not be seeing the talent of all the people working in his tent. And that is that the ability to sell this idea that even though they've done it 8 times that week, that just this time, you know, I might fall off this wire that I've got on, you know, I've got onto this little tightrope every day since I was 5, you know. And
but you know, they do play the drums and they do make music to make you feel anxious.
Yeah.
It's not that it's without illusion.
And that false falling, as you said earlier, you go to see it twice and you realize, oh, that same mistake is made every night.
Yeah, and in a way, it's almost
that's show business.
That's show, and it's in a way, it's more impressive. I mean, I absolutely.
But you root for you want him to succeed. That's back to your thought.
And what is Barry Lubin but an actor? If he's not a grandmother, he's an actor.
Barry Lubin is not a
grandmother.
We're referring to Grandma, the clown in the Big Apple Circus.
You know what I mean? That's acting. Come on. Paul, where is he? He should not have left.
Okay.
There's his chair right here.
Now Paul Binder really should be back here.
I know.
But the point about the circus skills, if you don't know it's difficult, it's the same with the straitjacket. If you don't know it's difficult, why watch it? Or why is it going to be interesting?
Right.
Well, the strangest experience on that is I have to tell you, one time at a show in Spain, I was in the middle of nowhere, and I couldn't get out, and I had convinced myself, I was able to get out, but I had convinced myself that I couldn't. It was the strangest thing. But that's my problem.
Well, you know, this
TM.
Exactly.
right. This whole thing of performance, the circus is now performance art. I mean, it used to be that Houdini called himself an escape artist, but now David Blaine is calling himself a survival artist. And what that makes his act worth watching, if indeed you think it's worth watching. Is he going to survive by holding his breath for
17 minutes, 26.
for 17 minutes and 27 seconds or whatever? Mm-hmm. I mean, to steal a line from the late J. Marshall, sometimes I hate myself for not caring.
Well, I have to disagree with that one, because I remember actually Jackie Flosso, who was the son of Al Flosso, the Coney Island fakir, and he listened to David Blaine do an interview on, of all things, now I forget, the man who is now on XM, the Wild Morning disc jockey, and I can't.
Howard Stern.
Thank you. Yeah. And he heard him on Howard Stern talk about let's just say a escapade, and he said, "Mark, this kid's a star." It is like, and he goes, "One word," and I go, "Okay," and he's like, "Believability," which kind of comes right back to where we started, which was in hearing him tell an anecdote to Howard Stern that was, let's just say, involved a different kind of Olympics. What Jackie was listening for and really amazed by was that he was so completely and totally believable. And it really is a craft. And of course, this gets back to the heart of the actor's trade and what all the people in the support team of the production team supply is an incredibly believable environment. So even you might not care about the long time under the water, but if a majority of the people believe it, then he has an audience, and we're back to that thing that Paul was referring to.
But excuse me, he's not asking anyone to believe it. He's saying this is real.
Yeah, he's saying he's doing it. Yeah.
He's not asking to, like, is he doing it or is he not doing it? He's saying he's doing it. It's real. Yeah. He's exhibiting.
Even though that's a very legitimate question.
Yeah, he's exhibiting a feat of endurance or ability of the human body. Can the human body not breathe for X minutes or?
Yeah.
But that is not, I don't know, I just separate it from theater for me.
Yeah,
I don't think it's involving illusion, and I'm thrilled to be involved with illusion.
How do you get the two beams of light then?
Well, I'll just tell you a little, it's off the subject, but no, I'm happy to. But actually what I was going to tell you was how we focused them, which was interesting.
I'll take what I can get.
Yeah, well, it's really we found a site downtown quite close to where the catastrophe happened, and we mounted in a square form 40 of these huge searchlights. And what we had to do is figure out how do you layer them? Do you put them in rows? With a triangle? What would make you see a square in the air? It's an illusion. You're not seeing it's not a solid thing. It's many things side by side. And the trick was, how do you focus them? How do you get them perfectly parallel? And in today's world, we think we have all the technology of computers and what have you. We ended up, after we abandoned almost every other way, we sent somebody to New Jersey with a walkie-talkie, and someone up to 96th Street with a walkie-talkie. And the two of them talked to each other, to a third person at the light, and we said to the guy, move it a little bit further and that's how we do it every year.
Proves you're a practical man, Jules.
Yeah.
Problem solving.
Can I ask a question, Charlie? You say you're in trouble if you come out and say this is an empty box. But you say the most important thing is to convince them you can't get out of the straitjacket. How is one different than the other?
Well, actually, with the escape stuff, you really are selling something that isn't exactly like all the rest of magic. I mean, Conan Doyle believed that Houdini actually could dematerialize his body and get out of things. But that tension that exists in magic between reality and illusion, or between the myth and the fairy tale and the detective story, it's out of that tension that magic delivers something that's very unique, and no other art delivers it. And to be frozen in a block of ice is certainly curious, but is it entertainment? I mean, I'm not sure. With Houdini, people did think, is he going to get out of the water torture cell? And on the first Doug Henning special, which was done live, and to this day has the highest television rating of any variety special ever on television, we did the Houdini water torture cell, and it involved Doug hanging upside down in a tank of water. And it wasn't recorded, it wasn't on tape, it was actually happening, and people watched it from all over the world. And it is one of the few times in television that gives maybe Evel Knievel and stuff like that, but it does give these things an edge that will draw an audience, and when we rehearsed the water torture cell, one of the first things I said was, let's put a scuba tank in the bottom of the cell, and Doug had to use it. I mean, sure, it's a gaffe for him getting out of the cell, but it's not completely dangerless.
So how is that different than the safety wire on the aerials?
Yeah, Jules.
You see the safety wire.
Save me, Jules. Save me.
No, I'll tell you. You can see
it.
The safety wire. You can see it. It's right there. And I remember
Well, like you can see the wires in Peter Pan when people fly around the stage.
Well, I would offer that as different.
Well, yeah, the wire in Peter Pan is allowing the effect to happen. The safety wire is there only in case of need.
I remember before safety wires when I watched the Wallendas under a tent in the Ringling Brothers Circus.
Yes.
And there were no safety wires.
No,
it is a different experience to see it without the safety wire than with the safety wire. I'm not in favor of one or the other. I don't think people should die for my entertainment. But I think part of the excitement is that everybody's looking up and saying they could die.
That's it. And the feeling of triumph in the members of the audience when they do 7 people high make it across that wire and get to the platform. It's really a great emotional thing, and it's an emotional thing because it's real, and the audience isn't asked to believe. They know it is real.
Well, and it should be
no
said,
fake.
It should be said that was absolutely brilliant. As I can say, as a teenager home in Wisconsin, watching Doug Henning struggling to get out of this water torture cell, I completely bought it. And there was a big surprise because it really looked like he had drowned. And there was a phenomenal ending that you should actually see sometime. And your work on that was unbelievable. And I was certainly convinced that... and there was no, if there was a safety net, I wasn't aware of it.
There was none.
Yeah. Well,
the worst tragedy we actually had in that whole thing was that Doug lost an earring.
Well, speaking of working without a net, now is that time for, if you have a question, please go to the microphone and, oh, there's a bit of a race. So, okay.
My name is Fred Sander. I conduct a theater discussion series here at the Institute where the audience sees a play and then has a discussion afterwards. And I look forward to hearing a lot of the different reactions to the performance that we've just been listening to, and it's been extremely stimulating to listen to your experiences in making theater. I have a question to ask, though, that has to do with the assumption that there's a reality and there's art and that there's this great divide. And of course, those of us who are psychoanalysts, and I'm sure not psychoanalysts, are aware that we're really talking about childhood. We're talking about everyone's childhood when they are first trying to realize what's real and what's not real. And that becomes something that performers and audience share together, is this tension between what's an illusion, and Ed referred to it. And what I want to ask is, I think, we talk about art imitating reality and reality imitating art. There we have to see that the two are not so divisible. When children grow up, they want to know how are children born? Where do they come from? So somehow, 2,000 years ago, the idea got spread around that there was a virgin birth. Mary gave birth without having had intercourse. Now, that's an illusion. Ed referred to religion that we've lived with for 2,000 years. It's an illusion became a reality in our culture. When George Bush sent our troops over to Iraq, he said there were weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, and we had to go over there. And I just want to emphasize that this distinction between, there's a lot of art in the real life, and there's a lot of reality in art. So that I think this division that we're making is somewhat a false one. When 2,000, 3,000 years ago, when the sun was arising, people thought this was a god or something. They created a kind of thing. We're now talking, 2,000 years later, as if we know what reality is, and we know how to just tweak the stage so that we make it real. But I think we're living at a particular moment in time, which I don't think we've given justice to either childhood or the history of mankind.
You see, I think I agree with everything you say, and that's true. I think there is an ethical thing about taking an illusion and passing it off to people, and taking an illusion and lying about it, and saying this isn't an illusion, this is real. You know, it's like Uri Geller bending spoons and knives. I mean, he's telling people that he really is doing that. Do you realize if you really could do that, first of all, it seems like a kind of trivial way to prove you're God, but it is unethical for him to do what is basically a magic trick and say it isn't a magic trick. Now a magician doesn't do that. Some mentalists do it, but a magician shouldn't lie. It's a bad thing.
But we also haven't discussed. We don't have the time to discuss it. It would take another evening or another several evenings to discuss illusion, the creation of illusion in the service of the state, and how government and let's say mask the Inigo Jones, Ben Jonson masks in the service of the state versus the anti-mask, which was allowed 20 minutes before the huge spectacle, which was meant to glorify. I mean, to see George Bush in the pilot's uniform, we you know, the illusion. He didn't fly the plane and land it on the carrier. That's one illusion, and then we have the illusion of victory is ours. You know, so you make wonderful points, but boy, it's exhausting just thinking about staying here for another 10 hours to discuss them.
Yeah, I would suggest that Uri Geller, Everett Lawton, that Uri Geller may have been doing spoonerisms, but that is something. Sorry about that. That George Bush, the Virgin Mary, the people who believe it, they are not lying. They are guilty of guilty is the wrong term. They are committing cognitive dissonance. There is no insight to what they're doing. I would also ask you, Doug Henning was probably subconsciously, in deference to the New York Analytic, looking for transcendence from the very beginning. And I
believe that's true.
Right. And I think, in another sense, that's cognitive dissonance as well.
But is there... Jules.
So I was just going to ask again, because I always wondered this about Doug. Was he not disappointed week after week when he kept doing something?
Well, you know, it was funny. One of the tenets of the whole TM Maharishi thing was that they were going to learn to fly, and out in Iowa, they actually had two huge airplane hangars. One was the women's flying dome, and the other was the men's flying dome. And these had sponge rubber mattresses on them, and they would leap in the air and land back down again. And this was the beginning of learning to fly, which the Maharishi said that they would be able to do. And so every day they'd go in they'd bounce up and down on these things, and that was their flying lessons of the day. And one day Doug said to me, or I said to Doug, I said, Doug, do you really buy this thing that you're going to be able to fly? And he said, I've been doing it now for 6 months, and he said, the more I do it, he said, the lighter and lighter I feel when I do this. And I said, that's because you don't eat. Because, you know, he lived on nuts and berries, and you know, but they were very, very sincere people. I mean, there was no.
Isn't that sad in a way?
It's sad to me.
To me, too, yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, I'm sure George Bush believes.
I think it's sad
In what he's saying.
Well, Well, yeah, maybe because, or maybe he believes it because Dick Cheney told him.
I'd like to add an important note. I think it's important.
Yeah.
My name is Arthur Drone. I write plays. The poetic imagination is in disrepute in this country right now. Student of mine did a beautiful play on the parents of murdered children in Houston. The papers called him the new Arthur Miller. HBO called him on the phone and said, "We want to make a movie of your play. Give us the clippings." And he said, "Oh, I made it up. I did research and I made it up." And then they said, "We can't do it because we only do fact-based movies." Now, as Peter says, we don't have the time to discuss this at length, but, you know, I mean, in reality television, I mean, is that real? No. I mean, but the idea of the imagination is being downplayed, which is a whole other discussion of why are they doing that. And, you know, so I'm going to stop right there.
It's an interesting irony, by the way, that
Oh, sorry.
That magicians, that the film started as a magic trick. That magicians saw film and said, "Hey, this is a great trick. I'll put it in my theater and do it." And that's precisely what Méliès did. He was the head of the Theatre Robert Houdin in Paris, and he saw these very early primitive movies, and he presented it as one more magic trick. And then eventually film came along and it killed vaudeville and put all the magicians out of business. And it's a great irony. You know, it's very, very interesting.
Could we let this young man speak first, because we want to encourage it, and then you know.
I was wondering.
Oh, could you say your name?
William Brosnahan.
Yes.
I was wondering, how do you get out of a straitjacket? I mean, you know.
It's a lot of hard work.
Okay.
You have to dislocate your shoulder most times.
Oh. Really?
Yeah. It's not easy. You should never try it at home.
Should you happen to have a straight jacket?
Well, I'm not planning it to do to me. I'm with my brother.
Well, you can always put him in one and see if he can get out. That's what my brothers would have done with me.
Right.
But they had a good time. Yeah, but afterwards I'll show you a little way to loosen up your wrists. All right?
Okay.
But let's give him a big hand. Thank you very much.
Well, I noticed sometimes, Camilla Golden is my name. I'm an artist. I'm writing a children's book. It has a lot of magic in it. I noticed seeing a production that has, you know, wires, people being lifted off, and, you know, whatever, all these big productions really get in the way of me suspending my disbelief. I'm much happier with a smaller production where I become part of the loop, like you described, with all the faces looking at the audience. That's when it really works for me. Otherwise, I look at a production and think, they shouldn't have spent this money on this stuff. They shouldn't try to fool me like this. I really want to see the real thing. And it's ultimately not very satisfying. And I was curious about talking about the yearning, that our human yearning for coming in and having our beliefs suspended. And other days maybe we come in and yearn to find out what are the mechanics of this. I think we can be different audiences on different days.
Yeah,
good point.
Yeah, but you know, it's also kind of related to why radio. You know, you listen to something on radio, and the sets, and the costumes, and all the things that make up a film are much more real because they're in your mind. You've created them. You know, you use it to shoot a story, and people say, "Oh, that's a fake building," and so on and so on. But your imagination doesn't build fake buildings. It's a much more real experience.
Well,
sorry, Peter.
No, I've been doing this for a long time, and it's hard sometimes not to get cynical. It's hard not to get depressed about the state of my particular art. And but the thing that is true and that never ceases to amaze me is that people still want to see theater as much as they ever did. You know, and I see people waiting in line to get into a play. I say, what are they doing? Why are they coming? The people that I wish there was punishment for are the people who are, I have to say, sort of perverting the theatrical experience, as Arthur said. You know, I mean, the reality television, the things that are taking away our use of our imagination.
Right.
I don't know what the answer is to that. I think it feels like a tsunami that we just cannot stop. I don't know if there will ever be a recovery from it. But I know the desire in the human heart and soul and mind to go to see a live play is still burning.
Yeah.
You know, and we just don't. We're just running out of opportunities for that experience.
Well, the thing that's depressing about the television experience with so-called reality shows is you're really being sold a bill of goods.
Yeah, it's not.
I mean, you're really, this is not like going to a play or watching a magic act. I mean, these people are telling you that these people are out in the jungle and that there are cannibals behind the trees and you know that just out of the frame, you know, is the commissary wagon and lights and cameras. Yeah, the support staff of people. Yeah, you know, this person isn't going to die falling over the falls. There are too many people there to save them.
Well, the Marshall McLuhan book about hot and cold mediums.
Yeah.
Well, the radio is a hot medium because you have to work at it.
That's right.
You have to think. And the idea that, this is a tiny thought I have occasionally about reality. Even when you see the Cousteau films, where he is doing something alone in the water, you know that somebody else is near him with a camera.
Yeah.
Or a mountain climber.
Somebody's running that camera.
National Geographic, where someone's climbing up a steep cliff, somebody's nearby with a camera.
Yeah.
And I love that comment about the feedback loop, I have to say, because one of the most amazing things about being a live performer in an area like illusion is that it is corrective over time. The audience is such a phenomenal teacher. One of the greatest things that I learned from that magician that I studied with was to really carefully listen to my audience. And the last part of the training was I would go out and do shows and come back with all the problems that I didn't have a good answer for. And that's an amazing process that just never stops. And everyone who works in live theater is really blessed by this direct connection with their audience. Because we always have something to learn from them.
I think we have another question right here.
I'm Signe Hammer. I'm a writer, and I'm making the switch from nonfiction to fiction, so I'm beginning to learn how to create illusion. And what I'm learning is that really, in a way, less is always more. I think people really want to believe, and I think the art of creating an illusion is inviting them in, providing them with just enough to give them an opening to move into it and make something out of it. And the more you explain, which in a way is the wires that are visible, the more you shut them out in a funny way.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you know, I totally agree with you.
Nick?
Two things, just to get any reaction from anybody. Kind of intrigues me. Freud and Jung, when they were both asked, like, how did you figure out what you wanted to do? They both said, remember what you loved to do as a child, start doing it again as an adult. And I was wondering how, first of all, that might, for a couple of you, connect with how you got into doing what you do in terms of if that was the case, that some aspect you loved to do it as a child and you follow through. The other thing, I was saying this whole thing about illusion, vision, where there is no vision, the people will perish, that how source is accessed and comes into existence is through that process of vision, of image, imagination, that mystery, that we're interested in this because this is the way nature works and operates, and how source comes into reality and we progress and evolve. Like mirror means mirare, to be filled with wonder and amazement. If just go with it, it's interesting.
Well, I can tell you my first memory, one of the first, maybe it's not the first memory of my father and why I'm in this business. It's my father. He's wearing a dress. He's walking down the main street of our little hometown. He's got a wicker basket on his back. In the basket is a little boy with his legs over the front of it. He's wearing a sailor hat and he's waving to a crowd. I'm in the crowd. The boy in the basket is my father. The lady in the dress is my father. Attached to his waist is the front part of a woman with huge breasts, and her arms are around back holding onto the basket. It's a costume. But I saw my father, it's one of my earliest memories, my father as this old lady carrying this little boy. Both of them were my father.
Yeah, right.
What do you make of that, doctor? So, I mean, it was an illusion.
Right.
It was funny. It was a clown act as part of a small-town American parade. And it was an illusion. My father... I'm very fortunate to have had a father who was an actor, and it's the who asked the question, and it's the profession which engaged me at a very early age, and a profession which I've been fortunate enough to follow all these years. I'm really one of the lucky ones to be able to have done all my life what I love to do.
It's funny. People love to be astonished and amazed. But they really don't like to be deceived, or fooled. They don't like it. But if you can amaze them without lying to them, then you've got something really strong going for you.
How did you guys get to do what you do? These special things that you do. When you were young, did you have a experience with them?
My first theatrical memory is Brigadoon, and the curtain went up on a scrim with a dry ice cover behind it. It just transported me. That combined with the fascination and joy in natural beauty. The dry ice cover, a lot of the things I work with are natural elements: fire, wind, fog, rain, water, and the things, they're not easily controllable. There is an element of unpredictable, well, I guess if you look at the physics of it, it is predictable, but to control all of the elements in the theatrical environment is not possible. And so the joy of the unexpected and the beauty of it is just fascinating for me.
What did P.D. Barnum say to Eugene O'Neill?
I don't know. What did P.D. Barnum say to you?
I don't know. That's why I'm asking the experts.
Well, there was a great question. Answer?
I don't have any idea.
I did.
There's a punchline lurking there.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't have the answer, but my name is Dino Antonio and I'm an actor. And I guess I had a question for the panel. We talked a lot about suspension of disbelief. And I found for myself, as my logical mind developed and the more I learned about something, I became, let's say, a lot more skeptical of being fooled. And once I got to more expert level knowledge in certain areas, I always found it's interesting how I could return now to being the child and be my mouth agape and look at something done really well and be in the moment with it. And so I guess my question was for the panel. You guys are all experts, say as actors and as magicians. What is it for you? Are you still able to to go for the ride, or are you always sitting back with a little bit of distance?
I absolutely love to be fooled. I really do. A number of us here were recently at a historical conference, and one of the features was a very, very famous card trick called the hooker rising cards. And we were all baffled. We really were. There were two highlights. The other was Jules' talk on lighting up, and it's really true. Those were the two things of the entire event that I remember. If I had seen those two things, I would have been very, very happy. And I'm very curious as to how the hooker rising cards work. I've thought a lot about it, and I've done a lot of research on it, and everybody else is, and you have too. But what a great experience.
Absolutely. Can I elaborate on that, on the effect? We went to see a magic trick that was actually created in 1919 or early, 90 years ago, in Brooklyn, by a doctor who wanted to develop a magic trick, basically where you pick a card, or you choose a card, or you think of a card, it's put into a deck, and the card rises. That sounds so simple and so banal almost. Well, it's a magic trick, there's a thread. Well, here was an effect where we watched it done over and over again, each time in a slightly different way, without a lot of... The lighting was simple. There was not a lot of shadows. It wasn't things that were hidden. There were not a lot of stories involved. It didn't try to distract you with other things. But it was so... Whatever method was used was so well concealed that for me, after about the 8 minutes, I gave up trying to figure it out. I just went with it, and I was watching magic. I mean, it was one of the best things in my life, watching that effect. It was so hard to believe that I couldn't figure it out. I mean, that was astonishing, knowing a little bit about science, and we live in a world where we grow up with a lot of technology. It was all wiped away by this very simple card trick. I had a couple. You ask, are we still fooled or still taken in by it all? I am still taken in, and I'll give you an example that answers your question also. How did I get started? When I was maybe 8 years old, I saw an early. It was a children's entertainment in my school, but it was something like a play like Rumpelstiltskin, or I don't know. There was a wall. It was a scrim. It was a brick wall covered with ivy, and there was a man standing in front of it. And slowly, magically, I saw this woman inside the castle, and it was a piece of scrim. Scrim is a fabric like net stockings, has paint on it, and if you light it from the front, you can't see through it. And if you put light behind that piece of cloth, you now can see through it. The cloth becomes invisible. And it's used to this day. I use it in shows, and we use it in magic. But it was so magical that this wall could disappear. I have another experience which I saw when I came to New York many years later. I went to see, here's a place you wouldn't think of, I went to see a Balanchine ballet of Midsummer Night's Dream. And at the end, this entire ballet takes place with people running around all over the stage, on the stage level, and at the very last moment, Puck stood down center and did a pirouette and lifted off and went when it flew, and the curtain came down. It was just magical. So I go to see plays, or I go to see even films I find are full of fantasy, in which I get caught up in the storytelling. So yes, I still do it, and I love being fooled by magicians. I'm totally easily fooled.
I wanted to say that I grew up, my father was a magician, and he had worked in the circus. That's where he met my mother, who was a bareback rider. And he did.
May I ask their names?
Well, I'll get to that.
Okay.
So he had many wonderful tricks and illusions, and I was very entertained from when I can remember, when I was very young, from being 1 year old to 2 years old to 5th grade. when I went to class that day and told my teacher about it, and she said, "You better come see me after school." And when I went up to see her, she said, "Well, I know your parents, and I know your father's a scientist, a government scientist who works on satellites. I seriously doubt he was a magician. And I know your mother, and I seriously doubt he met her at the circus." And I was shocked. But then I realized, I think she's right. I've been just fooled all these years. So I went home, I confronted my father, and he said, "What? Oh, I was kidding." So I just want to say...
Oh, man.
So I just want to say that his lying to me was a bit of a tall tale, and I said, "I think I can't go back to school. We have to leave town." But I also think that his tale made the tricks more magical and more exciting. And I did deal with it later in therapy, so.
Well, we want to thank you all for coming. We want to thank Peter Maloney and Greg Meeh, Jules, Reynolds, and Ed and Francis. Thank you so much.
Further information about our programs and a complete archive of past Philoctetes events is available at philoctetes.org.